We definitely are experiencing weather weirding, wilding, and whiplashing in our climate casino, and it's going to get worse, and it's going to affect our ability to grow food and to have sufficient fresh water.
Everyone, and thank you for braving the rain to be here today. This is the Climate Emergency Forum, and we're going to be discussing food and water insecurity. My name is Regina Valdez, and I'm part of the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm also a climate reality leader, as well as the program director for Climate Reality Project in New York City. We're talking about a very important topic today. As we know, there's no life on Earth without water. So often the focus is on food, but in order to have food, we need to have water. And I'm going to begin with this brief number, 2%. This is about the amount of water on the planet that is potable. That means the water that is available for us to drink. That's a very finite number for, it almost seems, an infinitely growing population. So we don't get any more potable water. And this article I pulled from the New York Times about water scarcity. You can see this was printed in Monterey, California, or written in Monterey, California, speaking about how water and water scarcity will soon be critical. The interesting thing about this article, it was published in the early 1950s. So as you can see, this is not a new topic, and it's not one that's going away. And I want to bring your attention to the San Joaquin Valley, which is in California. This region produces about 12% of the agricultural output for the United States. That's a tremendous amount of agricultural product that is produced here. However, what's problematic is it's essentially desert. And so how do we get water to this region? Well, of course, we have to depend on rainfall, or the farmers have to depend on rainfall. But when rainfall isn't plentiful, you still have crops that need watering. So here is the issue, and this is pumping the water from the aquifers in order to water the crops. And there are many, many very thirsty crops that are grown in California. I bring your attention to almonds. So I was quite surprised that it takes a gallon of water to produce a single almond. A lot of thirsty crops in California, including almonds and tomatoes. And what happens when this water is pumped out of the aquifers is the land begins to subside. So why am I talking about drought? Why am I talking about pumping water? Why am I talking about the land subsiding? It's because these are all connected issues. We really can't speak to them in isolation. So it's said that certain areas in this region sink to the tune of 30 to maybe even 60 centimeters annually. It's quite a lot. And when that happens, it creates pressure, and in terms of the agricultural runoff, there is a lot of nitrate and arsenic, which leads to water that is not compatible for human consumption. And when the land is subsiding and you have the aquifer underneath, the agricultural runoff leaches into that water, as well as going into the general water supply. And so there are also exacerbating factors. It's not just the drought, it's not just pumping of the aquifers, but there's poor distribution, and we see this in many other countries in the global south as well. Poor management. Some may argue that watering crops such as almonds maybe not be the best use of water. And then there's a misguided politics. There's a lot of conflict in the state of California, neighbor against neighbor and neighbor against farmers, because of the political finagling that farmers are getting much more of the water than the actual individuals. And I want to turn it over to Dr. Peter Carter. Dr. Peter Carter is the founder of the Climate Emergency Institute, and he is also an expert IPCC reviewer, and we're going to see a film of him speaking to us virtually from Canada regarding this topic. So if you can.
So, hello everyone. My name is Peter Carter. I'm the director of the Climate Emergency Institute, and I have been following the proceedings of COP26 closely, particularly today when Greta Thunberg made a great speech for the Youth Day in Climate Justice. When we think of climate justice, of course, the first thing that comes to mind with respect to climate change is food security and water security. We have known for decades that both of these would be impacted very adversely with global climate change. So we have these papers, and our team here is aware of them, but I don't think the world as a whole, and certainly the policymakers and governments, I don't think are aware of them at all. So in December of 2019, there was a paper published by GALP called Increasing Risks of Simultaneous Global Breadbasket Failure. And this got a fair amount of publicity in the media. What we're trying to do is to remind people, over and over so they get it. This paper said that we show an increasing risk of simultaneous failure of wheat, maize, and soybean crops across the breadbaskets. Projected wheat, maize, and soybean yield losses in the global breadbaskets increase. The losses increase disproportionately between 1.5 and 2 degrees C. So the breadbaskets are adversely hit at 1.5 degrees C, but much more so at 2 degrees C. The highest simultaneous climate risk increase in the breadbasket regions was found to be wheat, next maize, next soybean. The second paper is particularly interesting to us and will be no doubt well known by my colleague, Paul Beckwith, who is very knowledgeable on the jet stream. On December the 9th, 2019, there was a paper headlined, titled, Newly Identified Jet Stream Pattern Could Imperil Global Food Supplies. So this was all about the jet stream, which is being changed by particularly changes in the Arctic, the loss of sea ice, the Arctic warming and heat waves that are affecting the jet stream pretty well every year now. Here's the thing. They found a 20-fold increase in the risk of simultaneous heat waves in major crop-producing regions when they added on what the models projected was going to happen to the changing jet stream and the wave patterns that were being changed. And these resulted in reduced rainfall, dried up soils, vegetation, and severe damage to crops, including what they call crops would be killed in each region. Now, in this paper, large widespread regions of North America, Europe, and Western Asia were involved. So this is the third of these terribly important papers for world food security. This is a paper by Mehrabi from close to where I am, from UBC in Vancouver. This was published in Nature Climate Change last year in 2020, and the title of the paper was Synchronized Failure of Global Crop Production, and the media headlined it as Food System Collapse. The paper said the following: food security is uncertain under future climate change. I don't think that's been true for many years, but the team asks, is there a threat of food system collapse? And the paper says, now research assesses the probability of weather hazards occurring at the same time in the world's major breadbaskets and revealed that already the weather-related component of this risk could be increasing. So here we have 3 papers showing that we are in big trouble today, big trouble in already committed, completely unavoidable global surface heating and climate disruption.
So to discuss more about some of the background causes and perhaps even to elucidate further on the jet stream, we have Paul Beckwith. Paul Beckwith is a climate scientist and climopaleontologist and a well-known climate educator and has over 1,000 videos on YouTube. So Paul.
Thank you. So a report just came out recently called Climate Change Risk Assessment 2021 by the Chatham House. It's a very detailed report, and I highly recommend that you have a look at it. So in the food security section, they say what is happening already. So in recent years, regional drought and heat waves have caused 20 to 50% crop harvest losses. So, for example, Australia lost 50% of their wheat harvest 2 years in a row, 2006, 2007. Europe, the 2018 heat wave led to multiple crop failures, yield losses up to 50%. China, drought years led to 20 to 25% reductions in maize, that's mostly corn harvest. Global food crisis in 2007-8 depleted grain stores, and there were some simultaneous crop failures and food prices spiked, and then we had this so-called Arab Spring. How much worse will it get? We're going to need 50% more food by 2050, but the projections show that yields could decline by 30%. So there's going to be a huge gap in what is required to feed the world and what will be available, and that's not very far off. Droughts 3 times worse by 2040 than today, and also the idea of simultaneous crop failures in different regions is there, the risk is there. During the 2040s, there is a 50% chance of synchronous crop failure, according to the Chatham House. And the reason why you get synchronous crop failure is because the jet streams form these waves and circumvent the planet, and they often get stuck in place, so you'll get a strong ridge. And if you get a strong ridge over a crop-growing region, then there's high temperatures, heat waves, and drought. And then you get a trough in the wave, and that's torrential rains leading to floods. And then the next wave, you get, a ridge again where you get heat waves there. When this gets stuck in place, it could basically severely, simultaneously take out a lot of our global food supply. I wouldn't be surprised if we have price spikes and a famine within the next decade. In terms of water security, what's happening already? 13.4 million people in the Sahel need relief aid. This was in 2020. Huge drought and water scarcity in the US drought of 2012 was forecast to reduce GDP growth by about a percentage point. Natural disasters declared in 71% of counties in the US. 2020 drought in China affected 1.5 million people. 100 rivers cut off, so flows stopped. 180 reservoirs dried up. 140 irrigation wells ran dry. So how much worse will that water security get? By 2040, 700 million people exposed to drought every year. And the proportion of the population in the globe experiencing prolonged severe drought each year rising, like Western and Central Europe, North Africa and the Middle East, Central America. More than 10% of the populations will be impacted by severe drought. So water stress is on the rise. It's not just drought that takes out food supplies, it's flooding, right? Torrential rains leading to flooding, flooding crops, also severe storm surges on crop-growing regions near coastal regions can get inundated with salt, which makes the soils non-productive. So what's happening now, 23% more floods in 2020. How much worse will it get? 200 million people at risk of frequent, devastating 100-year floods. 60 million people per year will be impacted by river flooding. We've seen horrendous river flooding in Europe, in Germany. This year is an example. So all of these things are happening presently, and the risks of tipping points and cascading risks or cascading feedbacks can cause abrupt changes, and that puts us in the realm of, oh, geez, we didn't expect that, or, unexpected type event. So it's definitely, we definitely are experiencing weather weirding, wilding, and whiplashing in our climate casino, and it's going to get worse, and it's going to affect our ability to grow food and to have sufficient fresh water.
Thank you so much for that really, really scary information that you're sharing with us, Paul. And so on this next presentation, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the water cycle. But when we hear about climate change, we so often hear about the future. But as Paul just shared with you, the future is now. The future is now. We have issues. They say that we've fought for decades wars for oil, and they say that the next wars will be over water. They say that a great deal of the issues surrounding the Syrian war had to do with water and water scarcity. A lot of the conflict between India and Pakistan also is said to relate to conflicts over ownership of the water of the Indus River. And of course, we see neighbor against neighbor, and we see homeowners against agricultural industries in California. These conflicts are happening now. But I want to bring your attention to the water cycle. As the atmosphere heats up, there's more water that's being taken out and up and out, and leading to the greater degree of water vapor being held in the clouds. And a lot of people don't realize that water vapor is a very powerful greenhouse gas. Because of the warming atmosphere, the water vapor is able to stay in the atmosphere longer, and when it rains torrentially in the form of hurricanes. Some people may say, that's great, manna from heaven, we need lots of rain. But what happens is when this rain falls precipitously in this manner, it's not this nice water that drips into the soil and is allowed to absorb. It hits very hard surface and runs right off, so the aquifers are not filled. It's said that 70% of the world's population will face water scarcity for at least 1 month every year. Those people who do not have access to clean drinking water are not going to sit quietly. It will bring about conflict. As we have more droughts, we have, it's a cyclical issue. And as the trees die off, there's CO2 released into the atmosphere. And as more CO2 is released into the atmosphere, there's more warming. And so it forms this feedback loop where we have less and less water to go for less people, for less animals, for less crops. And so now I'd like to turn our attention once again to Peter Carter.
So I'm now going to address the severe danger of losses of regional and global water security. Nothing, of course, is more important. Now, first of all, I want to start off with a chart which was published in the 2018 IPCC 1.5 degrees C report. This chart I found in the 5th chapter, which is the Sustainable Development chapter, but it is the most important and concise chart. And what they projected was that water insecurity would increase significantly at 1.5 degrees C. But at 2 degrees C, billions of people would be impacted by loss of water security, the loss of the availability of clean water. I want to just include here the food security, which was included in this chart. And So we have billions of people at 2 degrees C affected by water insecurity. We also have billions of people affected by food insecurity in the form of declining crop yields. Once crop yields start to decline due to global surface heating and climate disruption, they will continue to decline. The other thing I just want to mention is heat waves. And at 2 degrees C, billions of people will be suffering under extreme heat. Now, we've had some very recent information on water security. The WMO published a special journal paper called The State of Climate Services 2021. And this found that more than 20% of the world's river basins have experienced rapid increases and rapid declines in their surface water area. And I want to point out that both extremes are bad for populations. Since 2000, flood-related disasters have increased 134% compared with the past 10, 20 years. The number and duration of droughts has increased by 29%. Things are getting terribly bad for our water and food security and the future of humanity. Because, as this report said, it will get worse as the planet warms. The IPCC had told the world in the much publicized report in 2018 that global warming will intensify the global water cycle, and included in this will be a variability of global monsoon patterns. And that's important both for India and those regions, but also important for North America. And as the global water cycle is intensified, the severity of wet and dry events will increase. Everything is going to get worse more rapidly. Furthermore, the UN, the Human Rights section and Migration Refugee section of the UN said that already a large proportion of conflicts that they're seeing in Africa, they're now saying for sure, is rooted in environmental matters, including water, quote. And in Somalia in particular, climate-related events become the major driver in displacement of people. And 3/4 of new displacements are being driven by water, stress, flooding, and drought. And this isn't just, again, the so-called most vulnerable areas. This is including Europe. Last year, a European Environment Agency report was published called Water Resources Across Europe. Water stress is already a situation that is occurring in Europe. Droughts and water scarcity are no longer rare, this report says, and about 20% of European territory and 30% of Europeans are now affected by water stress during the current average year at this time.
So I just want to point out that when we're talking about, and especially as Dr. Carter just spoke to millions and billions of people suffering due to lack of water, let's please be very careful not to think of these as in terms of statistics, but real people, just like you and me, suffering from something so basic as a lack of clean, safe drinking water. Paul?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to tell you a quick little story which I see as paralleling this COP and all other COPs. And the story is, the headline is, "Man announces he will quit drinking by 2050. Okay, so a Sydney man has set an ambitious target to phase out his alcohol consumption within the next 29 years as part of an impressive plan to improve his health. He's going to continue to drink as normal in the foreseeable future before reducing consumption in 2049. He has assured friends it will not affect his drinking plans in the shorter medium term." He says it's important not to rush the switch to non-alcoholic beverages. It's not really realistic to transition to zero alcohol overnight. This requires a steady, phased approach where nothing changes for at least 2 decades. He's going to bring forward drinking credits earned from the days he hasn't drunk over the past 40 years, meaning the actual end date for consumption may be 2060. And he's bought a second beer fridge, which he describes as the capture and storage method. So this is in an Australian spoof group called The Shovel, but it sounds exactly like what countries are doing today, right? They're all talking about these future targets, and each year, we meet at different conferences and the targets are not met, and it seems like we're making no progress. So we need immediate action. We need immediate things to happen because there's all these tipping points in the climate system that can exacerbate food and water shortages. For example, the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheet disintegration, can greatly not only change the albedo, make the Earth darker, but cause accelerated warming and sea level rise. The permafrost losses with the release of methane. And just this year, the rise of methane at all levels of the atmosphere has shot way up and is alarming lots of people. The AMOC, the ocean current breakdown, I've talked about the jet stream and the atmospheric circulation breakdown, but the ocean currents are also slowing and breaking down. Boreal forest shifts as we get wildfires in the boreal forests and they die back. If the climate has changed, we won't get forests growing back. We'll get grasslands and they won't absorb anywhere near as much carbon. The Amazon rainforest dieback is very concerning. It's a large tipping point in the climate system. And of course, the Arctic loss of ice sheets is a huge tipping point. And it's a toss-up whether the Amazon one will be reached first or the Arctic one. So all of these things make us live in a much more uncertain climate system with all kinds of bizarre weather patterns and weather events. We're getting the frequency, severity, and duration of extreme weather events increasing around the world, and those things are having direct impacts on our ability to grow food. And as the Arctic sea ice continues to melt back, that will be a tipping point in the climate system where the Arctic will accelerate. As much as the warming is now in the Arctic, it will accelerate even more with no Arctic sea ice. So we're in a very uncertain, very unclear world, and our ability to grow food and to maintain any sort of lifestyle that we have is going to be severely threatened. So we will see wrenching changes in the near-term future. Our objective is to try to reduce these and try to minimize these by taking action, but we've set in motion a climate, we've changed the climate system into an angry climate system that is not so easy for humans to deal with. So I'll pass it back to you, Regina.
Thank you so much, Paul. I read in the Times that if we want a glimpse into the future without water, there's a movie that was recently came out from a book called Dune, where we wear bodysuits. I mean, it's sci-fi, obviously, but where water is in such short supply that we have to recirculate our own human reserves. And while it's science fiction and far-fetched, one has to wonder, how far-fetched is it? It's really scary. So I just want to leave you with this line that water is life, and without water, there is no life. And I am also quite aware that I am surrounded by an embarrassment of riches as I say this, because we're surrounded by not just water, but designer water and fizzy water and all kinds of water. And we have to ask ourselves, is this the best way that we use our water? So again, thank you so much for being here today on this very important topic. And I also want to thank those who made it possible for us to bring this program to you. And that is the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, as well as the International Society for Ecological Economics. So once again, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the day.